when it really hit me that we had 400 families that were dependent on our company. We can't screw this up. We've got to make them successful. Well, first of all, you're going to make a lot of mistakes. If there's any advice I can give people, it's react fast. When the market does something to you, downsize or right size as quickly as you can. Don't think you're going to wander your way out of it or it's going to change on you. It is what it is, so move quickly.
In your view, you talked about community already, but what are the key components that contribute to, we'll call it a fulfilling life?
Understand that everyone has brilliance. You need to look at each person and say, I got to figure out what that brilliance is.
I don't think enough people are thinking about that on a regular basis.
Let's bring in Grant White, portfolio manager,
an investment advisor.
Welcome to the Finding Your Wealth podcast.
What this whole podcast is about is redefining the conversation around wealth.
The whole thing is absolutely a bit of a tire fire, in my opinion. I don't like drama, and this stock is surrounded by drama.
So Nick, thanks so much for jumping on the show. I appreciate it. I mean, the joke is, for me anyways, that I met you at the Winter Club, so I'm not used to seeing you with so much clothes on here.
I understand.
But
you look better.
Yeah. But I appreciate you joining us today. And especially, I think this is you're an interesting person to have on this show with us because, this is all about talking about, people's definition of what wealth really means and understanding what freedom really means in their lives. And I mean this in the best possible way. You've been around the block. You've been around for a while and worked with some really amazing people, and you've obviously done some things yourself. And so, really happy to hear from you and what your viewpoint is on all this. So, I like to always start off this our episodes by just asking you about like where your freedom is today, and we scale it on a 1 out of 10. So 10 being I'm all completely free, I don't have anything that's holding me back from what I want to do, and 1 is like maximum constraints. I'm not doing anything I want to do. So where do you think you are today?
Well, I'm a pretty optimistic person, so I'm always close to 10. And I think that comes from just appreciating that we live in Canada. I had the parents I had. They insisted I got education, and then I met the mentors and had opportunities where doors open, and I went through them, and things worked out.
Yeah.
I kind of believe that you have to be lucky in life, not before you work hard.
Yeah.
And the older I get, the more perspective I have on the world, and think that we really need to appreciate our country. When I travel, I'm shocked at the turmoil in other countries, and I always encourage people to focus on leadership here in Canada. We need the best people in our leadership positions, and unfortunately the jobs are rough and ready, and nobody wants those jobs. But we have to really encourage our friends that are thinking about it to be MPs and MLAs and take those leadership positions.
Do you think? Because I've had that conversation with many people too about like politics, and like you're right. I mean, nobody really. This is a bit of a tangent, obviously, in the episode, but like nobody really wants to go into politics. It doesn't seem anymore. Not our best leader. Our best leaders seem to be, focusing more on the building companies or something else, in my opinion. And that's not an absolute truth, because there are some great leaders still going into politics, I think. But do you think? What do you think about what do you think about that? Like, I've had a viewpoint of we can do more from the private sector than me going into politics. Like, I can create a company that can do more, knowing that I have to work with the politicians at some point. I'd be interested in your viewpoint on that.
Well, I met Wabi. He came up my front steps one day when he was first running, and I said, Wab, I read your book. I'm not voting for you, so don't waste any time with me. I said, you're not ready.
Yeah.
Well, he spent 10, 15 minutes chatting about things, and I developed a respect for him, and been following him, and now I'm so glad he's doing what he's doing. And in fact, I've said to him, I said, well, I know you need to balance the budget, but you really need some help. You need the business community, you need the nonprofits, you need the academics, you need labor to get in a room and figure out how we're going to do it. Mm-hmm. And we need to take the heat off of you, because anytime you make a decision that seems to affect some minority group, they turn on you, and we can't let that happen. We've got to protect our leaders and know that not all decisions favor everybody.
Yeah, I think So we were talking about off air the idea dinner earlier, and Indra Nui was the award winner a few years ago. I remember her talking about the importance of working with you're working from the private sector, but you have to get the government on board. You have to work collaboratively, and I think that touches on what you're talking to as well. In Wob's case, and for those who don't know, Wob Canoes, who we're talking about, the Premier of Manitoba. Working with the private sector and getting people on board. But I think that's incredibly important. It's probably been lacking in a number of places throughout the years here.
Well, I always explain to young people that if they're not going to be in politics, they need to help the politicians. And they need your advice because they are in a brand new job. I mean, you can imagine coming out of the investment business and all of a sudden you're running a portfolio on health or Northern Affairs, you have no idea. So the first thing you have to do is assemble a group of advisors to give you the real facts and some prudent advice on what to do.
Yeah.
And you need it fast because you've only got 4 years to make a difference.
Yeah.
So
it's not an easy job.
Don't be afraid to help politicians with good constructive suggestions and resources.
Yeah. Getting back to your version of wealth, and so you're close to a 10, or you're an optimist, you're a 10 or close to it.
Optimist.
Yeah, I tend to rank myself around a 7. Like I'm on my way, but there's things I want to work on, and so I'm glad to hear I've got a 10 in the room. When you think about your version of what wealth means, what does that look like for you?
Well, when we went to school, we had no money and we were happy.
Yeah.
Going third class, and you'd go on a date and you wouldn't have any money, so you'd find something that didn't cost anything, and it seemed to work out. I think I'm frugal by nature, so I'd rather save money. I'd rather never fly first class. I'd rather save that $4,000 or $5,000 and give it away. I can give it away easy, but I can't spend it on something I don't need to spend it on. I think I'm in a position where I'm able to give money away and resources away, and that's a real privilege to be in that position. And I think our family has about 5 foundations around the city, supporting the rowing club and a park and the Asper School, Business Kids, the United Way, and the Tomorrow Fund, and then Winnipeg Foundation with a general fund. So to me, that's the ultimate position of satisfaction, helping others.
Yeah. So where does that mentality come from? That the idea of community and getting back and how important that is?
Well, it certainly came from my parents. They were always involved in the community. My mother was a political supporter, activist, if that's a good word. Because my father was always at the games, and he was one of the few fathers at the community club, shoveling the rink and coaching the teams because there was no coaches.
Yeah.
So I understood that things don't happen until somebody jumps up and makes them happen.
Mm.
And I learned that at National Leasing, where young people would come to me and say, how do I get involved? I said, well, pick your discipline, whether it's arts, culture, sports, where do you want to go? Because these agencies are desiring people like you because they're not business people. You can make things happen that they can't do. So jumping in and getting involved was in my blood. Of course, working where I did work, it was the culture to support the United Way.
Yeah, yeah. So I didn't know this before. We both attended a dinner last week where Mark Chipman won the award, and he was talking a little bit about your contributions, I think, in his speech. So I didn't know that you started at McGill Stevenson, right? If I'm correct. How did that come about? I'm curious because was that your first. Or where were you before then, and how did you?
I was in school, and by chance I happened to. Mark's brother Steve said, "We got to go talk to my father."
Oh, okay.
And,
okay.
I did, and then next thing you know, I'm there for the next 40 years. He was a terrific guy and an awesome mentor for me, and to be working beside him for as long as I had was incredible.
Yeah.
Because he could start a business on a dime and kept starting businesses, and I was kind of the managing partner, and I had to sort them out, and sometimes say no, but sometimes say, yeah, we'll figure this out somehow.
Yeah.
So that's where it came from.
Yeah. So did you go to school with Steve?
Yes, I did.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I wasn't a St. Paul's guy, so I was
Interesting.
The Calvin guy, so I was a bit of an exception.
Well, we let a few of them in, once in a while. Yeah. That's funny. So when you, I guess you, like RM or Bob mentored you for a number of years. Is that fair to say?
Well, I was thrown into the fire pretty quick, and because we had so many businesses, I was at some point a VP running 10 or 12 companies, small companies,
Wow.
keeping track of them and helping them along.
Yeah.
And one of them happened to be national vehicle leasing, so I learned the vehicle business and dealership business, and then I learned the finance business. Then out of the blue, people said, well, we want to lease equipment. And we said, well, why not? And we started doing that.
Yeah.
And that turned out to be the hockey stick growth that we all dream about. You know, so you got 20, 30, or 40 businesses, and one takes off. Well, we weren't that smart, but we were smart enough to jump on this one and say, okay, we've got software people, let's build software to support equipment financing growth.
Right.
And there's lots of stories behind that curtain.
Yeah.
But
So that driving force, because just thinking about like running 12 businesses or helping to run 12 businesses at a time and getting into like 40 business, was that always in your nature to be able to adapt across that many different things at one time, or was that something that kind of came about just because you're working?
I think it's in my nature. I
Yeah.
I took my arts degree first, and I took all kinds of survey courses, and then I went into business and did the same thing there. And every once in a while, someone would say, well, you have to pick a major. You have to figure out how you're going to graduate. So I have to specialize to graduate. But I always wanted to do survey courses, and I guess I was destined to be a general manager because I wanted to know a bit about everything and maybe not too deep on anything.
Jack of all trades.
Because the secret really in management is to understand what the other guy knows and whether he knows enough to do the job.
Right.
Way better than you could ever do.
Yeah.
And sometimes I struggled with VPs because they wanted to know about everything. And I said, well, that's not your job. You know, I had a lawyer once that wanted to take an investment course and get certification. I said, well, you don't need to do that. You're not going to be valuable to me if you understand investments. It's hard to explain that to someone that's just focused on learning and being there. But if you don't practice it, you're not going to be any good at it. So
Right.
I could take 10 accounting courses, but if I didn't practice it, I wouldn't be any good.
Yeah. So
learning what people know is the key.
yeah. I've always subscribed to that. I need to surround myself with like people that are smarter than me, basically, and
Sure.
and especially in specific disciplines. And so it sounds like we have that somewhat in common at the very least. We talked about R.M. Chipman. Are there any other mentors that you would say have really influenced you along the way in your journey?
That's a good question. There's hundreds because I'm involved in a lot of organizations, and in every organization you find people doing amazing things, and you plug into that and say, how can I help, or how can I do the same thing?
Mm-hmm.
Particularly in business, how can I make my business better by learning from others, but no one specifically that I worked with, arm in arm as I did with Bob Chipman.
Yeah. Okay. Do you still seek that out today? Like, given where you are in your career now, do you still seek out like other people and looking at what they're doing? And
yeah, I belong to a lot of organizations. I belong to the Associates.
Yeah.
As you know, I was at the Rod Sempt Family Business Conference this week, and I learned all about responding to cyber attacks, against reputations for companies. And I thought, God, I never thought about that, having a plan B to respond as quick as you need to a cyber reputational attack. Then I learned about all the succession taxes and that the government's talking about for small business. And I thought, oh my God, this is overwhelming. Our government does not understand. Our economy is built on small business and small business succession. And we need to get that message out to our MPs that they need to back off on this.
Yeah, gotcha. So, coming back to, again, this whole podcast is about people's definition of wealth. We're trying to get beyond the financial. I mean, obviously, at a wealth management firm like Endeavor Wealth, like we focus a lot on that. But in your view, you talked about community already, but what are the key components that contribute to, we'll call it a fulfilling life, and beyond just financial abundance? What does that look like for you?
Well, I think I set out after school at some point with 3 goals: one, to build a business, one, to build a cottage for the family, and obviously I think I had my wife lined up at that point.
Yeah.
I think she helped me build it, and then have kids.
Yeah.
And with respect to the business, when I realized, and maybe I realized part of this sooner, but when it really hit me that we had 400 families that were dependent on our company, I thought, we can't screw this up. We've got to make them successful, because that's a huge impact if our company doesn't do well.
Yeah, the stakes get a lot higher. I know. I had that same thought a few years ago here. We were going through the pandemic, and at the beginning, it's like we didn't really know what was going on, as in nobody did. And I remember just looking around, and I think we were at a staff of 12 people here at the time, and it's like, well, there's 12 families behind. It's not just like, and so it weighs a little bit heavier when you're thinking about the number. So getting up to 400, yeah, the stakes are high.
Yeah, and at one point we made most of our early employees shareholders.
Oh yeah.
And so we had a very powerful group of motivated individuals.
Yeah.
That were made a difference.
Yeah.
And at one point, one of our directors said, "We've got a risk here because so many of our employees have got so much invested in this company.
Yeah.
We could be liable." So we actually had to make it compulsory for every employee to have an RSP, and we were obviously matching it and build them another component of their portfolio so that they weren't totally reliant on their national leasing shares.
Gotcha. Interesting.
Because over the years, all kinds of things come at you, and we got torpedoed a few times over the years, and managed to sneak out of it.
Yeah. No, you mentioned the cabin, and so I grew up going out to Brereton Lake at the White Shell, and it's still to this day. I mean, we don't own the cabin. My aunt and uncle own it today, but that was always important to me. And I was reading about you, and is this true? So you still live in Crescentwood, and it's a family home that's your grandfather built?
Well, I think my great-grandmother was probably the sponsor. She was became a widow early, and she and her husband had a hotel and a number of properties, one of which was the home in Crescentwood, which they built. And then my grandparents, I assume they bought it, and then my parents bought it from the estate, and then my wife and I bought it. So we think we've got a son that'll take it over, is very interested. So if that happens, his child will be the 6th generation in the same house.
Wow, that's
in Winnipeg, which is pretty cool.
That's very cool. I mean, that just doesn't happen.
It happens in Europe. It doesn't happen much in this country.
I was going to say
it's to build a little cheaper, but this house is built pretty strong and has good memories.
Yeah.
And hopefully it'll be around a little longer.
Such a unique, legacy as a family to carry on. Yeah, like it just doesn't happen to. I mean, now people are building these. I mean, you look at the new developments that go on out, it's like basically outside the city, and that's what people are buying. So, so that's great. Speaking of family, obviously it sounds like you got a tight family, and that's a big piece of this whole wealth component to you as well. Do you have any maybe hopes and dreams for your family going forward, and things that you'd like to see?
What's interesting, when you become a grandparent, it's very different than being a parent, because you watch your kids and you watch all the things they do. I mean, we've got one son, he's building a house, he's got 2 little kids, both have got career jobs, and they seem to be working at home and taking care of kids, and then pretty soon they're putting siding on the house at night in the dark. And I said to my wife, I said, I can't imagine how they did it. And she said, well, we did that at one time, because we were building a cottage on an island, and between lives with elderly parents and all the pressures of raising a young family.
Yeah.
But when you're a grandparent, you have to learn to go backstage, because now you're just the support.
Is that hard?
It's hard to learn. But the most rewarding thing is to watch your sons. We have 3 sons. Watch your sons become better fathers than you are. It just blows your mind. they can do all these things. They think, how they learn all this stuff?
Yeah.
So I sure didn't teach them, I guess. Maybe I did, but it's very satisfying being there. And
so I'm a younger. My kids are 4, just turned 4 and 1. I got 2 girls, and so I'm on the other end of that than you are. So this is off script a little bit, but what's your best advice for me at this stage?
enjoy it because it goes so fast. I can remember my youngest walked out of the house going to school with his backpack in grade 1. I thought, wow, how'd that happen?
Yeah.
And he was glad to go. Didn't even say goodbye. Just went.
Yeah.
So
it goes
so fast.
It's amazing to say that because I was in Montreal for the first few days this week for a conference and some meetings, and my 1-year-old and actually my 4-year-old. So it's even just missing a few days. I come back and they've changed. They've my 1-year-old. She doesn't talk fully yet. She's getting some words. She's talking like it's a lot of blabber, but it's like, oh, I can tell she's trying to tell me something now, and that's like a change of 3 days. So it just things happen so quickly with them. So.
That's right. So get ready.
Thinking, throughout your career probably, but, it might be relevant today, there's a lot of people that I think obsess about the creation of wealth and their own definition of it. But, how do you balance, and maybe maybe you didn't think about it or maybe you did, but like, how do you balance like the other things that are important to you in life, like whether it's your health, your family relationships, your friendships, and the pursuit of your own like personal ambitions, and what was that like for you throughout your career?
Well, I think today, first of all, I had all my wealth into one company. So my financial advisor would say, well, that's crazy, because you can make a lot of money, you can lose it just as fast. But that's the way it was. But fortunately, we got out of there with our skin, and I had enough wealth to put some aside and some bonds and property, so that if the stock market collapses, we've at least got some security. So I think we're pretty set to survive.
Yeah.
And you do worry about that because you don't have an employment income anymore, so you have to manage it yourself to a certain extent. And then your friends are really the wealth. I stay connected with a lot of people that I went to school with. I've got 60-year friendships that I still maintain. And it's, through organizations like the clubs and the associates and the business council and other organizations, you just keep connecting with people, and that's the most rewarding part of life, is to know people and value their friendships.
Were you intentional about that? Like, maintaining friendships? Speak from my own experience with my young kids. Their schedules tend to dominate my free time now. Like anytime I'm not in the business, I'm usually doing something with them. And so what I've found is that I have to be more intentional about my friendships. But like, were you intentional about that throughout the years?
I think I was born with the ability to connect people. So I'm always looking. I was always the person organizing the football game on the the empty lot. Or
you were the glue. You're the glue guy.
Yeah. Or we had a group of friends that played hockey. We used to play against the residential school and academy, and we had an A line and a B line and a C line, and I have to make sure the other guys knew to match lines. And it was a Sunday afternoon game outside. We used to organize that, and I've organized ski trips, and still organizing a lot of events.
So that's the key. Be at the center of it, and then you'll always have friends if you organize.
That's right. But there's lots of people that don't connect, and you'll phone someone, or I'll phone someone I haven't talked to for a while, and they're glad you called, and they share some information, and then they say thanks for calling.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Apparently they don't have dial-out capacity on their phone, but I accept that they're not connectors, and I am, so I'll keep doing that.
Yeah. Oh, I think
particularly if I'm driving to the lake, I'll phone some characters that I haven't talked to for a while, usually out-of-town friends, and shake them up.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, admittedly, I think I fell off of that for a few years. And a good friend of mine, his name's Chris. Chris has been, he works at Cushman Wakefield, and he's been a great connector guy. And he's, even in some of our early career days where like we're both just extremely busy, he'd be the one reaching out. And I always appreciated it. It reminded me though that I need to like be doing the same thing, and it's a two-way street at the same time. I didn't want him always being the one driving the bus on that. So I think it's great. So you mentioned some torpedoes along the way that hit the business every once in a while, and I call those stealth torpedoes around here because sometimes you don't see them coming. how do you handle failure or maybe even mistakes, and throughout like your journey, whether it's personally or professionally, and what have those lessons taught you over the years? I don't know if there's any that come to mind.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Most of them. First of all, you're going to make a lot of mistakes. It's like the Jets are going to let some goals in. I know the goaltender doesn't ever want to do that, but you're not going to win a game 1-0 or 5-0 every night. You got to let some goals in, and that's part of life. And we had some market torpedoes that came at us. Certainly in 1980, when the energy crisis. Energy Act came in, and Alberta was in a complete recession. We suffered enormously with that. We had just expanded in Alberta big time, and we got hammered. Again in 1990, when the East was in a recession, and then 2008 with the credit crises, that hammered us again. But I think what I learned, and I used to come back and talk to the older guys, and they'd be saying things like, "Well, you'll have a better company when you get out of this." I go, "Yeah, but I'm going to be dead," because, I'd be traveling back and forth all the time and I had no life.
Yeah.
But it's true, if there's any advice I can give people, it's react fast.
Yeah.
When the market does something to you, downsize or right size as quickly as you can. Don't think you're going to ponder your way out of it or it's going to change on you. It is what it is, so move quickly. And you'll be at the top of the rubble pile, and then when the market does change back, you'll be the first to get off and get flying again.
Do you think that? So was that always in your nature to do that, or did you learn that throughout your career to react quickly and to?
No, I learned that through trial and error.
Yeah. Okay.
I would tell young people, like, don't procrastinate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Get going.
Yeah. I remember a few years ago when it was probably in 2022 when markets were struggling, and that was when interest rates started climbing quite dramatically and so on. I remember chatting with our team this year, and I did a bunch of research, or that year, and I did a bunch of research at the time looking at when companies had started to see like some of their mega growth in the course of their history, and a lot of companies. The ones that are probably the most iconic are the ones that take the biggest risks when everybody else is kind of like battening down the hatches and turtling a little bit. And I remember looking at companies like Disney, for example, or Apple, or the ones that, again, they're iconic today, but all of them were on the verge of bankruptcy at some point, maybe multiple times. Like if you've read Shoe Dog, like about Phil Knight and Nike.
Yes.
Yeah, fantastic book. And I remember reading the book. And I'm like, geez, they were almost bankrupt like 25 times.
Well, I think every good company has a brush with bankruptcy. I describe it as, we're up in the air and all of a sudden the plane's heading to earth.
Yeah.
And you got to get that joystick back in time. And most good companies will talk about those experiences where they pulled it out and got going again. And
yeah,
everybody gets a lot smarter, and when you have a recession, people learn to do two jobs and as opposed to one job. And you don't do things that you don't absolutely need to do, and so you really, cut out a lot of waste.
Yeah.
And then when the market does turn, you're in a much better position to go forward and spend your money where it needs to be spent. And that's part of budgeting. We should never budget once a year. We should budget all the time, because sometimes you have a great idea and you put some money towards it, and 2 months later you think, well, that's not such a great idea. So you can't be afraid to switch, pull the plug on that,
Yeah.
put it over somewhere else where you've learned that this is better than the last idea you had.
Yeah. How do you, you were talking about like trying new things a little bit earlier, especially in the businesses. Was that a natural thing for you to always be like trying new things and working with people that could try new things and new ideas all the time?
Well, it wasn't natural because we never had any extra money. We had to make money. We had to pay a dividend because none of us had any money to pay the bank for interest on our share loans, and we had to grow. So we had to grow some net worth to be able to borrow more money to subsidize the growth that was coming. So we didn't have any wiggle room at all until, I don't know what it was, maybe 15 years down the road. All of a sudden we had a little better balance sheet and we had some dry powder, and it was like, okay, we can now take a swing and a miss.
Yeah.
And it's not going to affect anything.
Yeah.
So we have to be careful what advice we give to people, because we can't all just jump on opportunities without that dry powder. And
Yeah, I think that's wise, because I mean, I think you're right. A lot of the messaging, especially, I mean, there's a lot of like celebrity entrepreneurs or, you know, social media influencer entrepreneurs out there now that, I mean, they tell a message, but it's not based in reality in many cases. And so I think that's sound advice for all the entrepreneurs that will be listening to this as well. It's like, taking, well, I don't know what the best way to, we talk about taking risks from a business perspective. It's calculated risks. And I think in my mind, you always need to be open-minded to new ideas and be willing to take on risks. But, last year we hired a CPA to work in the company who, he's our director of finance. And I call him my guardrails, because he sees risks, like that's his job basically. And I've always been the person, not that I ignored risk, but I'm comfortable with risk, let's say, or more comfortable with risk, but I enjoy having guardrail. I picture them like the bumpers at a bowling alley that keeps the ball in the lane.
Yeah, so. Risk is a relatively new discipline.
Yeah,
probably in the last 20 years we've really got good at it. But it's really anticipating, what do you do if something happens?
Yeah,
and if you've got a portfolio and the market hits you, 30% down, can you weather the storm?
Right.
What do you do if you get the cyber attack on reputation? How do you respond to it? You gotta think it out and put that plan on the shelf. Or if you have serious inflation or having trouble finding labor markets, some brainstorming is really helpful for when crises happen, that you can just pull the ideas off the shelf and get at it.
Mm-hmm.
I remember we had a crisis one time, and I remember we were talking about it. And one of the guys gets up, and we had this, 50 best managed company, or so we're thinking we're pretty smart. He gets up, takes that award off the wall, puts it in a drawer, says, "Okay, let's get back to being dumb again and resourceful."
Yeah.
So don't think you're too smart, because the market will tune you up.
Yeah, I guess a healthy dose of humble pie every once in a while, and the world is pretty good at reminding people of that every once in a while, whether it's a crisis or, whatever, a big shift or a big competitor comes into the space. It's not a bad thing, right? To keep, because you look at, I was at an event earlier this week in Montreal where the keynote speaker was a guy named Heath Swanner. Fantastic guy. He works with Simon Sinek, if you're familiar with him. But anyway, they were talking about General Electric and specifically Jack Welch's version of General Electric, right? And they use General Electric in a lot of their examples of a company that, it was the pinnacle of it. I mean, they were at the top. And I haven't done a deep dive into everything there that happened in General Electric, but it seems that they got very comfortable in being at the top and made some interesting policy decisions around, like, even leadership and management, and how they were managing more about costs and profitability and less about open-mindedness to new innovations and where things were going. And so they became a little bit lazy, but and they had an ultimate wake-up call, which ultimately is changed that business dramatically and forced sell-offs and things like that. So a healthy dose of humble pie.
They relied too much on their financial services that
Yeah.
supported the businesses that weren't getting innovative and competitive.
Yeah. So, so we talked about being intentional, but like looking at your level of freedom today, what mindsets do you think throughout your lifetime and your career, your life, were important in achieving the level of freedom that you have today? Because at 10, if you're at a 10 and you're living the life that you always wanted to, that's where we all want to be. What do you think contributed to that over the years?
Well, I've always focused on health and fitness, and I think that the people that I've got some issues, whether they're medical or not. If they're medical, there's so much help out there, and I always encourage people to get an advocate, get into the system, almost demand help for whatever your issue is, and then you'll get some resolution. I'm convinced of that. If it's personal happiness, then you're responsible for that, and sometimes you need to make a list of all the things that aren't going so well and decide how you're going to change that list to organizations or difficulties that you can resolve in the organization and find areas where you're going to be happy. Because if you're happy doing what you're doing, it doesn't work anymore. It's a pleasure, and you'll be successful.
Do you make lists about like what you want?
I did it one time, which was a real eye opener for me. I had an enormous list because I just thought I'm not real happy with all kinds of stuff. And sure enough, I was on all these boards, things that I didn't enjoy, and I had issues at work, and I made the list, and I didn't think much of it, but subconsciously it did something because I looked at it 3 months later, and they were all gone.
Oh yeah.
So I said I got to be careful that I need to replace them with places that I really enjoy working with. And places like the United Way, where I'm just amazed at the miracles that happen every day. And when I hear people get down in our city, I say, well, you have no idea how many great things are happening.
Yeah.
And I need to tell you some stories because we're doing so many things right.
Yeah, I think I don't know that that's just a Winnipeg thing, although I do see it here a lot. Like, we tend to get down on ourselves here, and we tend to see the bad and forget about the good. I mean, you and I have both been fortunate enough to work with the United Way for a number of years. You a few more than me, but you're right. There are good people doing amazing things, and I always feel that we need to support those people. We need to do as much as we can for those people. But if you don't see that type of work going on, because they're not out in public, like putting it on Instagram.
No.
All the cases, it's not on a billboard. You have to actually get involved to see that hard work that's at the street level that's going on sometimes. But yeah, there's some amazing people doing amazing things. So, yeah. Speaking of lists, are you a goal setter?
I'm a planner,
Oh yeah.
and I've been a planner all my life.
Yeah.
And this goes back to, my mentor days when I was getting mentored. I remember being at a meeting one time, and our organization had a big dealership group and a finance group that I ran and a property group. And we were always planned out, and, I always could figure out what we were going to make in 3 years. And one of the dealership guys said to me, well, we can't plan because we don't know who's going to buy a car next Saturday, let alone a month later. And I remember my mentor coming back to me later and saying, don't ever stop forcing us to plan because we can do it. Okay, I'm on. Yeah. So I plan our resources to make sure we've got enough to pay for our healthcare costs when we're in our 90s.
Yeah.
And then my financial advisor says, well, most people plan to live to 100. So I may have a hiccup there, but if you don't plan where you're going, any path can result.
So what are you planning for right now? What's big, or you're thinking about?
Well, I think you look at the return you're making on your stock portfolio. Sure. I'm not talking about activities. I'm just talking about our financial resources, how much you can afford to give away every year, and this is always a big debate, what you should leave to others, your kids. I'm not a fan of leaving them more than they really need. But certainly we've got foundations that desperately need to be funded, and that's always in our planning process.
I want to ask you this question. It's, just because we're talking about the future and such, and we talked about the community. What's your hope for the city of Winnipeg? I mean, we're both passionate Winnipeggers, but, and that's a pretty broad question, but I'd love to hear what you think we should be doing, maybe, or where you think we could be, and what's your hope for us?
We have so much going on.
Yeah,
I mean, if you look at these are $100 million projects. If you look at what's happening at the university with the Southwood Golf Course, all that development it's been slow off the ground, but now it's starting to move. And that's going to be residents. It's going to be a community of academics living there, students living there. Very different than the commuter college it's been. And then we've got the Bay. And the Bay is going to change downtown with people living there.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
And North Portage, we don't know exactly what's going to happen there, but I think it's going to be a massive service center for people living downtown and residents, I hope. So when people live in a neighborhood, they tend to tidy things up. And then we've got a Centerport, which is going to be a huge engine for our province, and I'm really glad that the government sees it as the engine that it is, and they're making sure that the infrastructure is in place that we can keep growing that. So those are massive investments in this community.
Yeah.
And Capion, I forget the new name for it, but it's another massive piece of property that'll be developed and turbocharge the city.
Yeah. There's a lot of good things going on. Do you have hope? You have hope for, I mean, again, like we were talking earlier about the challenges that a lot of communities are facing. I mean, I think coming out of the pandemic, there's, I spend a decent amount of time in Vancouver as well, and they're facing a lot of those challenges, if not more.
If not more.
You sound like a guy with hope. You're an optimist.
Well, I think people have to realize that every city's got the same issues, and I bet we're less than many of the cities.
Yeah.
And I think because we've got so many solution factors at work. We talked about the United Way and how effective it is, and what North Portage will do for the community downtown, and the issues when we're not afraid to put them on the front burner and see them and deal with them. That means we'll have solutions for them.
Yeah.
It's when you try and put your head in the sand and ignore them that you've got big problems down the road.
Yeah.
I don't think we're doing that.
Yeah. So face them head on. I mean, I think there's some good people leading that charge. I think one of the things I love about Winnipeg, I should say, is that we are still, I mean, they call us the biggest small city in the world. Yeah, the smallest big city in the world. Anyway, that small town mentality is here. And I think even the fact that you and I are having this conversation, and, I know Mark Chipman talks about this a lot, and when I hear him talk, and a lot of other leaders in the city about, not ignoring those problems and taking them head on and getting involved. They don't have to. Like, there's a lot of people that don't have to get involved. Mm-hmm. There's something about Winnipeg, I think, that we take ownership in the city more than a lot of other bigger cities, I think.
Well, I think Rob nailed it the other night when he said, you don't see Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment taking an active role in homeless people in Toronto, but our True North is doing exactly that. In fact, they're taking that lead role in finding solutions and supporting what other agencies and what government needs to do.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm a big fan of the, nobody's really self-made. I mean, we're all fortunate for the communities that we've been lucky enough to be born into and grow up in. And, you put a lot of us in overseas where there's, there's obviously challenges going on in the Middle East and you name it. But you put any of us in those cities or those places, and it's a lot harder for us to go and build the true north of the world if we don't have this great community around us that can support us and give us the platform to build off of. So I've always had the viewpoint we owe it back to that community.
And this community is one that's, when someone has an idea, everybody jumps in and helps. And it's, many hands make light lifting. Yeah.
So I think you're excited about this part of it because, of giving back to community. But, I'd love to hear what your advice would be to our young listeners out there, especially, but to any of our listeners really, about their own pursuit of wealth in particular and their own pursuit of freedom in their lives. So what would you say to them?
Well, I think I've already talked about planning, how important that is.
Yeah.
You're not going to get anywhere without planning. But the advice I give to management, and everybody's managing something, is to understand that everyone has brilliance, every person. And when you're managing a company or a department or whatever, you need to look at each person and say, I got to figure out what that brilliance is. I got to talk to them more. I got to learn about it. And if you're an employer, your job is to get them in a spot where their aptitude can succeed at the job they're in. Find the right job. So you don't want to send a salesperson down at an admin line or a admin person down a sales line. That's a disaster. Mm-hmm. But realize that every person can make or break your company. If they're at home talking about your company in a glorious, magnificent way at the dinner table, all those kids and people at the table are going to talk about your company the same way. And if they're discouraged, they're going to be discouraged. So respect everyone and view them as each person is the most important person in the organization. And I have to keep reminding myself that all the time. And when you live by principles, you do have to go for a walk each day and say, am I living up to my principles? And remind yourself to do it, because none of us are perfect. We all have to focus on our training, and whether it's fitness training or behavior training, and just learn from our mistakes, learn from the people that are smart enough or brave enough to give us corrective advice, and go forward with a better methodology.
I don't think a lot of people think about their principles enough, like what their values are. I mean, I think both of us have been fortunate enough to be around like some families, like the Chipmans is a prime example because they rely heavily on it's Bob's precepts that still guide them, and so I've heard that story many times over from the Chipman family, but I don't think a lot of families or individuals think about like what's important to us from a values perspective.
Or the Richardsons are the same way. I mean, the Bureau Richardson, they can all hear her saying, well, too much is given, much is expected. So step up. And yes, you have to keep reminding yourself that you need to step up and do what you think you need to be doing.
Yeah. I have a good friend of mine. He lives just outside of Atlanta, but that's something he does with his family. He's got a wealth management business down there, but he does that with his family every Sunday. They go through their family principles, and they have like 3 or 5 of them, but they go through them, and each kid has to like talk about how they contributed towards those principles that previous week, So
that's a great exercise.
Yeah. I mean, I was impressed when he told me about it, just how, again, intentional and systematic they were about being active in it. And I thought it was great. Yeah. So, but yeah, I don't think enough people are thinking about that on a regular basis. They're just kind of doing it. They're just doing life, So, the last thing I'd want to just ask you is, because I think people are they're hungry for information and hungry for new things to look at or read. And we certainly try to encourage that lifelong learning component. Are there any resources that, have had a significant impact on you, whether it's books, podcasts, courses, or anything like that had a significant impact on you and your mindset?
Well, I do a lot of reading, a lot of broad range of reading. I'm reading Dead Reckoning. It's about the Northwest Passage because I'm hoping to take a boat through the Northwest Passage next summer.
Very cool.
So I'm going to put together all the books about, John Franklin and John Ross and Barrow and all these guys that tried to find the Northwest Passage. And here we are through global warming, actually sailing through it with no problem.
Right.
But I read a little bit I just started reading this David Baldacci for Escape. He's a fast read, it's like Dan Brown. Like nobody ever sleeps in these books. They just go hard for 48 hours and the book's over.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating stuff. A neat book I just read was The American Dirt.
Okay.
And the title doesn't mean anything. It's about immigration from Central America into the United States.
Interesting.
And it would change your views on the way you view immigrants. And, when you listen to the Americans talk about putting up a wall and keeping people out, these people all have stories. And this is one story that is very moving and an excellent read.
Yeah, interesting.
And I always like business people to read, or political people to read about the Red Notice, Bill Browder.
Okay.
Bill was the guy that started the Hermitage Fund in Russia that the Communist Party basically shut down, and he escaped out of the country, and the government jailed his lawyer, Merlinsky, and basically killed him in jail. And Bill has been traveling the world trying to get that message out. In fact, they've got the Merlinsky Act in the United States where they don't let oligarchs bank in the U.S. And
right.
We finally got that in Canada. But he's had a number of attempts on his life. But it's just gives you an inside read on what Russia is really like.
Yeah.
It's a terrible country run by a terrible guy.
Yeah.
And it's real. And
those always remind me of, and we've been fortunate enough to travel a bit. My family and I, we love traveling to see what the world is like, and we try to live in the culture as much as we can. Those stories always remind me of just how lucky we are to be here, because you can go to so many parts of the world where, it's just life is way harder. Just an example, we were in Indonesia one year, and, the big thing there, and especially like, climate activists will talk about palm oil plantations that are being built there, and so they're cutting down the rainforest, which is, it's bad. Respectively, it's bad. But these people are cutting down the rainforest to build these plantations. It's the only thing they have. to do, and they have to put food on the table for their families. And like those types of things, seeing that in person was eye-opening, because what's going on in some parts of the world like this is like our consumer habits are driving the behaviors in the other part of the world. They just want to put food on the table. They don't care what they're selling. Mm-hmm. They just need to sell something, and so if we don't want some of those things to happen, we need to change our behaviors here. The other side of it is, you're looking at what people live on, or what they're able to do and live on in other parts of the world. I mean, we wouldn't be able to live a day on what some of these people live on over 6 months.
Yeah.
And it's phenomenal. So, thinking about my young girls, I'm like, I want them to see that side of the world as well, to understand how lucky we are in a place like Winnipeg, and what we can do here, and what we can do for the world here.
Well, a great book to read on that is How the World Really Works. It's written by a professor at the University of Manitoba, Smeal. It's a bit technical, so you have to read a chapter and then dwell on it for a while. It's not an easy read all the way through, but it really makes sense out of why we do what we do.
I'm going to check that out.
Yeah, that's a good read. And the last one I'm thinking of is The Northwest is Our Mother. And this is an important read for Winnipeggers, because in 1890, 85% of this population was Métis. And this talks about the history from the Métis point of view, and why there was a revolution in 1885. And I mean, they just wanted the right to own their own property. And, all these decisions went to London, heaven forbid, and Ottawa didn't know what to do. And but it's important for Winnipeggers to understand the Red River Métis heritage, because the Métis Federation here employs, I think it's about 5,000 people, and a number of buildings they own in downtown. I don't know how many.
Yeah,
but they're
more and more every year.
A very significant political component of our lifestyle.
Yeah.
But the book talks about all the events that explain the naming of some of the places in Winnipeg. I always like the Liberia. I go to Liberia Park all the time. That was the place where the Métis went to stop the surveyors coming from Ottawa. They set up a barrier and they sent them home. So it lets you piece together some of our history that's so important.
Yeah.
And understand that I always tell people we're all mongrels. I had my DNA checked, and I got all kinds of components in there.
Yeah.
But the Métis in Manitoba are very, very important component.
I'm laughing because my parents did the 23andMe or the DNA check as well. So my dad's family is very much like Scotch-Irish, mostly Scotland, in that area. And then my mom, so I asked him, like, well, how about mom's? What did it look like? And he's like, yeah, they confirmed she's Mennonite. Because it's all within like one generation between Germany and Russia and Ukraine, basically. But it's just like right there, so.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, but no, I agree. Like, we're all mongrels. Like, we all have to kind of, it's like, hey, it reminds me actually about this talk I was at earlier this week, where the topic was on the infinite mindset. And it's like, some people have this tendency of like, we get so narrow-minded about certain things, and it's like, we're all kind of coming from a lot of the, like, it's different places, but we're kind of all the same. So, the best thing we can do is be collaborative and work together and try to, solve some of these world's problems that we have. And if we do that, I mean, there's no end to what we can accomplish together. But man, sometimes we just get so into this finite mindset of trying to win the game, and the game doesn't end. I mean, it goes on forever.
Yeah, so. We all have to win.
Yeah. So we have a tradition at the end of the last question is a gift from the previous guests that we had on. And so the question that was left for you was, if you think about, and I didn't prepare you for this on purpose because we like to be off the cuff at the end. If you think about the biggest mistake that you can think of, and you could be either personally again or professionally, that mistake, knowing what it was, knowing that you came through it, what would you change it? Would you change how you reacted now?
I made so many mistakes.
It's hard to identify.
I can't pick one in particular, and I don't think I'd change anything, because you're a composite of all your experiences, and whether they mean good or bad, you take away building blocks of what you are today. So I would say the mistakes are good, and nothing I haven't got away with murder or anything, but nothing is devastating or anything that I can think of.
Well, that's a good answer. That means that contributes to that 10 out of 10 that you're living, I think, today.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
So, well, Nick, thanks so much. I appreciate this. I know, again, I think a lot of people are going to be interested to listen to what you had to say today. And so I'm excited to share that with people. And I'll give you the last word if there's anything else you'd like to add that you'd like to share with our audience.
Well, I'd like to thank you for all you do in this community, because you're one of these leaders and mentors and builders of our community. So keep going. And I only support the United Way because I don't want to let the people down that are running it. So
Yeah.
I keep saying, Grant's doing this, or GP will be doing it next year. So I got to stay on the committee and keep raising money, keep making my calls and supporting you. So whatever you do, Grant, I'll be supporting you.
Oh, well, thank you, Nick. I appreciate that. No, I'll never stop. And just like you, I think it's a lifelong pursuit, and it's rewarding. So we'll never stop.
For sure.
So, all right. Well, thanks so much, Nick, and thanks everybody for listening today. And we can't wait to bring you the next episode. We've got more exciting guests coming on. So thanks
I'm
very
sure.
much for listening. Yeah. All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.